The Shadow of the Last Secret. Chapter 1. The Letter. Nicholas hadn't returned to his family's estate in years. The Shadow of the Last Secret. Chapter 1. The Letter. Nicholas hadn't returned to his family's estate in years. It loomed in his memory like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over every thought of home. Built by his great-grandfather, the grand Gothic mansion sat at the edge of a dense forest, where whispers of forgotten secrets echoed through the trees. His family had always been guarded, private, and there was an unspoken understanding that certain questions were never to be asked. But that was before the letter arrived. It was early morning when Nicholas found the old parchment in his mailbox, sealed with the familiar crest of the Hawthorne family, an ominous symbol he hadn't seen since the day he left. His fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. The script inside was unmistakable, written by his father's hand. Nicholas, the time has come for you to return. There is much to be said and even more to be revealed. You are the last hope for our family. I cannot explain everything in this letter, but you will find all the answers you seek within the house. Come at once. With urgency, your father. A chill ran down his spine. His father had been distant for years, withdrawn from the world and from Nicholas. Yet the tone of the letter carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. It was more than a request. It was a demand. 3 hours later, Nicholas stood at the foot of the mansion, the large iron gates groaning as they opened before him. The estate looked the same as it had in his youth, though now it seemed more sinister, as though time had only deepened the shadows that clung to its walls. As he walked up the path, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, observing his every move. The windows, dark and vacant, resembled hollow eyes peering into his soul. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood. His footsteps echoed as he ventured deeper into the hall, the familiar creak of floorboards beneath his feet reminding him of childhood nights sneaking through these same corridors. His father's study door stood ajar, faint light flickering from within. Nicholas paused outside the door. His heart pounded as he pushed it open. The room was empty. No sign of his father, no sign of life, except for a single envelope lying on the large oak desk. It was addressed to him with his name scrawled in a hurried hand. He picked it up and opened it, his pulse quickening with each passing second. There is something in the cellar. Do not trust anyone. The truth lies beneath. His breath hitched. What truth? And why now? Before he could contemplate the note further, a voice called from the entrance. Nicholas, is that you? It was his father, sounding frail and distant. Nicholas turned, pocketing the letter. He had the feeling that nothing from this point on would ever be the same. Do you think Nicholas is prepared for what he'll uncover? Subscribe and share to follow his journey into the shadows. Chapter 2. The Cellar Key. His father appeared older than Nicholas remembered, his once commanding presence diminished by the passage of time. He moved slowly, as if the very act of walking through the house was a burden too great to bear. Nicholas, I wasn't sure if you'd come, his father said, his voice a rasping whisper. But now that you're here, I see that I was right. It's time you learned the truth. Nicholas frowned. What truth? What is all of this about? His father gestured toward an old brass key sitting on a nearby shelf. The key to the cellar. That's where the answers are. The cellar. Nicholas remembered it vaguely from his childhood, how he and his cousins had been strictly forbidden from going down there. His father had always been adamant about keeping the place locked, claiming it was dangerous. But now, the very thing that had been kept hidden for so long was being offered to him as a solution. Nicholas hesitated. Why now? His father's eyes darkened. Because I'm dying. And once I'm gone, the secret will fall to you. It's something you cannot escape, no matter how much you might want to. The words lingered in the air like an accusation. Nicholas felt the weight of them pressing down on his chest. He had spent years trying to distance himself from this place, from the family legacy, but now it seemed as though it had been waiting for him all along. Reluctantly, he reached for the key. The cold metal felt heavy in his hand, and as he gripped it, a strange sensation washed over him. A feeling of inevitability, as if this moment had been predestined. There's more you need to know, his father said, his voice growing weaker. But you won't find it here. Go to the cellar. Everything will make sense once you're there. Nicholas didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward the hall, the key clutched tightly in his fist. Each step he took toward the cellar door felt like a step further into the unknown, as though he was descending into the heart of a mystery that had been festering for generations. The cellar door stood at the end of the corridor just as he remembered it. Old, thick wood with iron bands, it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. He inserted the key into the lock, his hands trembling slightly. The mechanism clicked and the door creaked open, revealing a dark stairwell leading down into the depths below. The smell of damp stone and earth rose to greet him as he stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around him like a shroud. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the narrow, winding stairs that spiraled down into the shadows. Nicholas descended slowly, each step echoing loudly in the confined space. His heart pounded in his chest, the oppressive silence only amplifying the sound of his own breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him down there, something that had been hidden away for far too long. At the bottom of the stairs, the cellar opened up into a large, cavernous room. Dust particles danced in the air, illuminated by the faint light of his flashlight. Old furniture was stacked against the walls, covered in sheets as though forgotten by time. But in the center of the room was something that didn't belong, an old wooden chest. It was large and its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols Nicholas couldn't recognize. His pulse quickened as he approached it. Whatever was inside, he knew it would change everything. What secrets lie within the chest? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and share to uncover the truth with Nicholas. The Shadow of the Last Secret. Chapter 3. The Chest. Nicholas crouched in front of the chest, his heart thundering in his chest. The intricate carvings seemed to writhe under the beam of his flashlight, twisting into strange, unfamiliar shapes. Symbols he couldn't quite understand, but that stirred something deep inside him. A primal instinct telling him to turn back. But he was past the point of no return. With trembling hands he reached for the latch. It was rusted, heavy with time, and groaned in protest as he forced it open. The air in the cellar seemed to thicken, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Nicholas lifted the lid. Inside there were papers, old yellow documents that had clearly been hidden for decades. But beneath them something else caught his eye. A small leather-bound book, tied shut with a thin string of what looked like hair. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine. He picked it up cautiously, untangling the string and opening the fragile cover. The pages were filled with handwriting, his great-grandfather's if he wasn't mistaken, but the words were in a language Nicholas didn't recognize. Strange symbols, like the ones on the chest, filled the margins of each page, spiraling around sentences, marking passages with an eerie precision. As he flipped through the book, one word kept appearing again and again: veritas. The truth. Nicholas's mind raced. Was this the truth his father had referred to? But the more he read, the less sense it made. The text spoke of rituals, of a family curse, of an ancient power passed down through generations. It was madness, some kind of twisted mythology that his great-grandfather had apparently believed in. But there was something else too. A diagram, sketched hastily on the back page, showing the layout of the mansion. A secret passage, hidden beneath the cellar. He traced the lines with his finger, heart pounding as the reality of what he was seeing began to sink in. His family's secret wasn't just a metaphor, something whispered about in the dark. It was something physical, something buried right beneath his feet. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Nicholas froze, snapping the book shut and shoving it into his jacket pocket. He turned off his flashlight and held his breath, retreating into the shadows as the footsteps grew louder, descending into the cellar. Nicholas. His father's voice called out, though it was weaker now, raspier. Are you down here? Nicholas pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his heart hammering in his chest. Something about the way his father was moving, too quickly for his age, too eagerly, felt wrong. He hadn't heard his father come down the stairs. He hadn't heard the cellar door open. A strange sensation washed over him. An instinct, a deep, inexplicable fear. Whoever, or whatever, was coming down those stairs wasn't his father. What is lurking in the cellar with Nicholas? Stay tuned for the next chapter. Don't forget to subscribe and share to follow the mystery. Chapter 4. The Passage. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairwell, and a shadow fell across the cellar. Nicholas gripped the edge of the stone wall, his breath caught in his throat. He could barely make out the silhouette of the figure standing at the entrance, but something was off. Its posture, the way it stood, too still, too rigid. "Nicholas," the voice said again, echoing through the cavernous space. It sounded like his father's, but there was a strange distortion to it, as if the voice was coming from deep underwater. "Come out, son." He didn't move. His mind raced. What had his father warned him? Do not trust anyone. The words burned in his mind now, stark and clear. The figure shifted, moving slowly toward the center of the room. Nicholas could see its outline now, but something was wrong with its shape. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders hunched at an unnatural angle. Fear gripped him, tightening like a vice around his chest. He glanced toward the far wall, where the diagram in the journal had indicated a hidden passage. If he could just find it, just get out of here, he might have a chance. The figure moved closer. "You can't hide from this," it rasped, the voice now unmistakably twisted, inhuman. "You're the last one, Nicholas. You can't escape the truth." Panic surged through him. He felt along the wall, fingers searching for any irregularity, any sign of an opening. The figure was nearly at the chest now, its movements slow but deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Nicholas's hand caught on something, an indent in the stone. He pressed it, and with a faint grinding sound, part of the wall shifted. A narrow doorway opened before him, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Without a second thought, he darted inside, the stone door sliding shut just as the figure reached the center of the room. Darkness enveloped him. The air was stale, damp, and heavy with the weight of years of neglect. He fumbled for his flashlight, flicking it on and revealing a narrow tunnel that stretched deep beneath the estate. Nicholas moved quickly, his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't know where this tunnel led, but it had to be safer than facing whatever that thing in the cellar had been. He tried not to think about it, about how it had looked, about how it had called to him in his father's voice. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the earth. The air grew colder the further he went, and soon his breath was visible in the dim light of the flashlight. Then, up ahead, he saw something. A door, old, wooden, and reinforced with iron, much like the cellar door above. But this one was different. It was marked with the same symbols that had been carved into the chest and scrawled in the journal. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he approached it. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, but he was too deep now. There was no turning back. With a shaking hand, he pushed the door open. What awaits Nicholas behind the door? Don't miss the next chapter to uncover the terrifying truth. Subscribe and share to stay in the mystery. The Shadow of the Last Secret. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber. Unlike the rest of the cellar and the tunnel, this room was clean, almost untouched by time. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with strange artifacts. Old books, relics, and odd trinkets that seemed ancient and out of place. At the center of the room, a single item caught Nicholas's eye. It was a large, circular mirror, standing on an ornate pedestal. The glass wasn't normal. It shimmered with a faint, unnatural glow, as though something was moving just beneath its surface. Nicholas felt drawn to it, compelled by an invisible force. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer, unable to resist the pull. As he stood before the mirror, his reflection wavered. His face twisted, distorted, then disappeared entirely, replaced by something else. An image, a scene from a different time. It was the mansion, but not as he knew it. The walls were pristine, the floors polished, and in the center of the room stood his great-grandfather, alongside several men Nicholas didn't recognize. They were speaking, though the words were muffled, indistinct. His great-grandfather looked anxious, his hands trembling as he held something, a small black box. Nicholas squinted, trying to make sense of the vision. Suddenly, one of the men stepped forward, his face obscured by shadows. He reached for the box, but Nicholas's great-grandfather recoiled, pulling it away from the man's grasp. The argument escalated, voices raised, hands gesturing wildly, until, without warning, the man in the shadows produced a knife. Nicholas gasped as the blade plunged into his great-grandfather's chest. The scene played out in horrifying clarity, his ancestor collapsing to the floor, the black box slipping from his hands, and the other men fleeing the room. The blood pooled around the body, dark and spreading, and then the vision began to fade. But before it disappeared completely, Nicholas saw one last thing: the man with the knife turning toward the mirror. His face, once hidden, was now visible. It was the same face Nicholas had seen moments ago in the cellar. His breath caught in his throat. His great-grandfather had been murdered, but by what? Or rather, by who? And what was the significance of the black box that had caused such violence? The image flickered and dissolved, leaving Nicholas staring at his own reflection once more. His mind reeled. The murder had been hidden from history, buried with the generations. The secret had been kept within the family, passed down like a curse. Suddenly, the door to the chamber slammed shut behind him. Nicholas spun around, his heart racing as the room seemed to close in around him. The air grew thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were pressing down on him. Then the mirror shimmered again and a voice, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the room. The box. Find the box. Nicholas's pulse quickened. The box, the one in the vision, had to still be here. But where? His mind raced, the sense of urgency mounting with every passing second. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a small shelf in the corner. Among the artifacts there was a space, an empty spot as if something important had been removed. The black box had once been here, he realized. Someone had taken it. But who? And more importantly, where had it gone? Will Nicholas find the black box before it's too late? Subscribe and share to uncover the next twist in his search for the truth. Chapter 6. The Final Truth. Nicholas stood frozen in the chamber, his mind a storm of confusion and fear. The mirror, the vision, the voice, it was all too much. He needed to find that box, the key to unlocking whatever dark secret had been buried in his family for generations. But how could he do that when the answers seemed so far out of reach? He took a deep breath, trying to focus. The box had been taken, yes, but by whom? His father? Or was it someone else? Someone involved in the events that had transpired long before his time? His thoughts returned to the figure in the cellar, the one that had mimicked his father's voice, twisted into something monstrous. Nicholas turned his flashlight toward the shelves, scanning the artifacts for any clues. His hand brushed against an old, brittle book, the cover nearly falling apart. It was a family ledger filled with names, dates, and cryptic notes, but what stood out to him was the last entry, written in his father's unmistakable scrawl. The box was moved to the vault. It must never be opened. It will destroy everything. Nicholas's blood ran cold. The vault. Of course. The vault was an old, nearly forgotten section of the mansion, sealed off years ago due to structural damage. His father had always insisted it was unsafe, forbidding anyone from venturing near it. But now Nicholas knew the truth. The vault wasn't just unsafe, it was where the most dangerous secret of his family was kept. Without hesitation, Nicholas retraced his steps through the tunnel, his mind set on reaching the vault. He could feel the weight of his ancestors pressing down on him, as if they were all watching, waiting for him to fulfill the role he had been born into. The mansion was deathly quiet as he made his way toward the vault. His father's warnings echoed in his mind, but they no longer mattered. Whatever had been hidden, whatever had been so carefully guarded, had to be brought to light. He could no longer live in the shadow of his family's lies. When he reached the door to the vault, he hesitated only for a moment. It was old, rusted, the lock thick with age, but with a sharp twist, the key broke through. The door creaked open, revealing a small, stone chamber. And there it was. In the center of the room sat the black box, undisturbed, resting on a simple pedestal. It was smaller than he'd imagined, barely the size of a jewelry case. But as Nicholas stepped closer, he could feel the power emanating from it, an ancient, malevolent force that had been waiting all these years. His hand shook as he reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the cold surface of the box, a flood of images flashed before his eyes. His ancestors, their lives consumed by the secret, each generation bound by the same curse. He saw their faces, heard their voices, and felt their pain as they had each tried, and failed, to escape the burden that the box carried. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Open it. Find the truth. Break the curse. With one final breath, Nicholas opened the box. Inside was a single object, small, unassuming, but heavy with significance. It was an old, tarnished key. The same key his great-grandfather had clutched in the vision, the key that had led to his death. Suddenly, the room around him began to tremble, as if the very foundation of the mansion was reacting to the unsealing of the box. Dust fell from the ceiling, the walls groaning under the weight of what had just been unleashed. Nicholas stared at the key, his mind racing. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. But as the walls shook and the voices grew louder, one thing became clear. Unlocking the truth would come with a price, and Nicholas wasn't sure if he was ready to pay it. What is the final secret that Nicholas has uncovered? Don't miss the shocking conclusion. Subscribe and share to reveal the ultimate twist.